When wheelchair-bound Dr. Sarah Kim arrived at Gate 12, the airline staff took one look at her and said, "This flight is full." But security cameras would soon reveal she was the only passenger they turned away that day. The airline's public apology would become the most-watched corporate statement in aviation history. Terminal C at Chicago O'Hare International Airport was experiencing its typical afternoon rush as thousands of travelers moved through its corridors with their luggage, heading to gates, restaurants, and shops. The terminal's design, completed just 5 years earlier, was considered state-of-the-art in terms of accessibility features, with wide corridors, elevator access to all levels, and designated seating areas for passengers with mobility needs. Dr. Sarah Kim navigated through the terminal in her custom titanium wheelchair, a sleek and sophisticated piece of equipment that reflected both her practical needs and her professional success. At 34 years old, Sarah was one of the leading neurosurgeons in the United States, specializing in spinal cord injury research and treatment. Her work at Northwestern Memorial Hospital had earned her international recognition and had helped hundreds of patients regain mobility and independence after devastating injuries. Sarah's own journey with paralysis had begun 8 years earlier during her medical residency, when a drunk driver had collided with her car on a snowy Chicago evening. The accident had left her with complete paralysis below the waist, but it had also crystallized her determination to dedicate her career to helping others with similar injuries. Rather than ending her medical career, the accident had redirected it toward groundbreaking research that was changing the lives of spinal cord injury patients around the world. Today, Sarah was traveling to Seattle for the International Spinal Cord Research Conference, where she was scheduled to present her latest findings on neural regeneration therapy. Her research team had achieved remarkable results in helping patients with complete spinal cord injuries regain some sensation and movement, and her presentation was anticipated to be one of the most significant contributions to the field in recent years. The flight from Chicago to Seattle was scheduled to depart at 3:15 p.m. from Gate 12, and Sarah had arrived at the airport 2 hours early to allow extra time for security procedures and any potential accessibility challenges. Her experience traveling with her wheelchair had taught her to anticipate delays and complications, though she had generally found that most airline staff were professional and accommodating when properly trained. Sarah's wheelchair was a high-end model specifically designed for frequent travelers. It featured removable batteries, collapsible components, and lightweight materials that met all current airline regulations for mobility devices. She carried detailed documentation about its specifications and had never encountered significant problems with its transportation on previous flights. As Sarah approached Gate 12, she noticed that the waiting area was moderately busy but not crowded. Several passengers were already seated near the gate, reading, working on laptops, or talking on their phones. The terminal's departure board clearly showed Flight 847 to Seattle with an on-time departure status, and the gate appeared to be operating normally. Behind the counter at Gate 12, 2 United Airlines employees were managing the pre-boarding procedures. Janet Morrison, the senior gate agent, had been working for the airline for 12 years and was known among her colleagues for her efficiency and attention to detail. However, her experience with disabled passengers was limited, and she had developed certain assumptions about mobility aid requirements that were not always accurate. Working alongside Janet was Kevin Torres, a newer employee who had joined United Airlines just 6 months earlier. Kevin was still learning the various procedures and regulations related to special needs passengers, and he typically deferred to Janet's judgment in situations that seemed complex or unusual. As Sarah positioned her wheelchair near the gate counter to check in for her flight, Janet looked up from her computer screen and immediately focused on the wheelchair rather than on Sarah herself. Without making eye contact with Sarah, Janet's expression shifted to one of concern and mild irritation. "Ma'am," said Janet, speaking in the slightly raised voice that people sometimes use when addressing individuals with disabilities, as if physical impairment somehow affects hearing, "I'm afraid we may have a problem with your flight today."
Sarah looked up with polite curiosity. accustomed to occasional complications, but expecting that any issues could be resolved through normal procedures. What kind of problem? I have my boarding pass and all the documentation for my wheelchair. Janet glanced at Sarah's wheelchair, making a quick visual assessment that would prove to be both inaccurate and discriminatory. Well, this flight is very full today, and we have weight restrictions. Your equipment might be too heavy for the cargo hold. This explanation was immediately problematic for several reasons. First, Sarah's wheelchair met all current airline weight and size requirements, as specified in both federal regulations and United Airlines' own published policies. Second, the flight was not actually full. Several seats remained available in both economy and business class. Third, Janet had made no effort to review Sarah's documentation or check the actual specifications of her mobility device. Sarah remained calm, drawing on years of experience advocating for her rights and those of other disabled individuals. "I have all the required documentation here," she said, offering a folder containing detailed specifications, medical necessity letters, and previous airline approval forms. "My wheelchair has flown on United flights many times without any problems." Janet accepted the folder, but barely glanced at its contents. Her mind was already made up based on her assumptions about disability accommodations and her desire to avoid what she perceived as complications that might delay the flight or require additional paperwork. "I'm sorry, but I just don't think we can accommodate you on this flight. This flight is full, and we need to prioritize our other passengers." Kevin Torres, the junior employee, watched this exchange with growing discomfort. He had recently completed training on disability rights and airline accommodation requirements, and he was fairly certain that Janet's response violated both federal law and company policy. However, as a new employee, he was hesitant to challenge his supervisor's decision in front of a passenger. Sarah felt a familiar surge of frustration and disappointment, though she maintained her professional composure. She had encountered discrimination before, but it never became easier to handle, especially when she was traveling for important professional commitments. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," Sarah requested calmly. "I believe there may be a misunderstanding about the requirements for accommodating passengers with disabilities." Janet's expression hardened at what she perceived as a challenge to her authority. "I am the senior gate agent here, and my decision is final. If you'd like to rebook on a later flight, I can put you on the standby list for tomorrow's departure." This response was particularly problematic because it demonstrated Janet's complete disregard for the urgency of Sarah's travel needs and the legal requirements for disability accommodation. Airlines are required under the Air Carrier Access Act to provide equal access to transportation for passengers with disabilities, and they cannot simply refuse service based on unfounded assumptions about equipment or convenience. Sarah realized that she was dealing with a situation that went beyond simple miscommunication or lack of information. This was clear discrimination based on disability, and it required a more formal response.
"I need you to understand that what you're doing is illegal under federal law," Sarah said, her voice remaining calm but taking on the authoritative tone she used when addressing medical students or hospital administrators. "The Air Carrier Access Act requires airlines to accommodate passengers with disabilities, and you cannot deny me boarding based on assumptions about my wheelchair." Janet became defensive at being challenged, particularly by someone she viewed as being difficult and demanding. "Ma'am, I don't need you to lecture me about airline policies. I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I know what I'm talking about." The confrontation was beginning to attract attention from other passengers in the gate area. Several people had looked up from their phones and books to watch the exchange, and some were beginning to take photos and videos with their mobile devices. Dr. Patricia Williams, a civil rights attorney traveling in the same gate area, had been observing the situation with increasing concern. As someone who specialized in disability rights cases, she immediately recognized the illegal discrimination taking place and began documenting the incident for potential legal action. Meanwhile, Robert Chen, a journalist for the Chicago Tribune who was traveling on the same flight, had also taken notice of the confrontation. He began taking notes and photos, recognizing that this could be a significant news story about disability rights and airline discrimination. Sarah pulled out her smartphone and began recording the conversation, a practice she had learned to employ whenever she encountered potential discrimination. "I'm going to need your name and supervisor information," she said to Janet. "I'll be filing a formal complaint about this treatment." Janet realized that the situation was escalating beyond her control, but rather than reconsidering her decision, she doubled down on her position. "If you continue to be disruptive, I'll call security to have you removed from the gate area." This threat represented a significant escalation of the discriminatory treatment and demonstrated Janet's complete failure to understand the legal and ethical issues involved in her handling of Sarah's accommodation request. Kevin Torres finally found the courage to speak up. "Janet, maybe we should check with the duty manager about this situation. I think there might be some policies we need to review." Janet shot Kevin a sharp look that clearly conveyed her irritation with his suggestion. "Kevin, I can handle this situation. Please focus on your own responsibilities." Sarah appreciated Kevin's attempt to intervene, but she recognized that the situation had moved beyond what could be resolved at the gate agent level. She needed to escalate this to higher authorities within the airline and potentially to federal oversight agencies. "I want to speak with your duty manager immediately. What you're doing is discriminatory and illegal, and I won't accept being denied service because of my disability." At this point, the confrontation had attracted the attention of nearly everyone in the gate area. Passengers were openly staring, many were recording the incident with their phones, and some were beginning to express vocal support for Sarah's position. "This is ridiculous," called out one passenger, a middle-aged businessman who had been watching the exchange. "The lady clearly has proper documentation. Why won't you let her on the plane?" An older woman with a walker approached the counter. "I've flown with my walker dozens of times. There's no reason this young doctor can't travel with her wheelchair." The growing support from other passengers further irritated Janet, who felt that her authority was being challenged by people who didn't understand airline operations. She reached for the phone to call security, intending to have Sarah removed from the gate area. However, before she could complete the call, duty manager Michael Rodriguez arrived at Gate 12. He had been monitoring the terminal's operations from his office when he received reports of a disturbance at one of the gates. As an experienced airline manager with extensive training in disability accommodation requirements, he immediately recognized that something was seriously wrong with how this situation was being handled. "What's the problem here?" Rodriguez asked, addressing both Janet and Sarah while quickly assessing the tense atmosphere at the gate. Janet immediately launched into her version of events, portraying Sarah as a difficult passenger who is making unreasonable demands and disrupting normal operations. "This passenger is trying to bring oversized equipment on the plane, and when I explained that we couldn't accommodate her on this full flight, she became argumentative and started threatening to file complaints." Sarah waited for Janet to finish before presenting her own account. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Dr. Sarah Kim, and I'm traveling to Seattle for a medical conference. I have a confirmed reservation and all required documentation for my wheelchair, which has been approved for airline travel many times before. This gate agent has refused to allow me to board based solely on the fact that I use a wheelchair, and she has made no effort to review my documentation or follow proper accommodation procedures." Rodriguez immediately understood that he was dealing with a potential Air Carrier Access Act violation, which could result in serious legal and financial consequences for the airline. He also recognized that the situation was being recorded by multiple passengers and could quickly become a public relations nightmare if not handled properly and immediately.
Williams appreciated Sarah's focus on systemic reform and explained how civil rights litigation could be structured to achieve broader institutional changes. We can seek not just damages, but also injunctive relief that would require United Airlines to implement specific training programs, policy changes, and monitoring systems to prevent future discrimination. The legal discussion was interrupted by a call from Sarah's research colleague, Dr. Michael Chen, who was calling from Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago with updates about the growing support from the medical community. Sarah, the discrimination you experienced has sparked incredible outrage among physicians and medical researchers, Dr. Chen reported. The American Medical Association is considering issuing a formal statement about accessibility in travel for disabled physicians, and several major medical conferences are reviewing their partnerships with airlines that have poor disability rights records. The involvement of major medical organizations added another dimension to the growing controversy, as these institutions represented significant business relationships for airlines and could exert economic pressure for policy reforms. Meanwhile, United Airlines was discovering that the incident was having immediate business consequences beyond just media coverage. Social media monitoring showed that thousands of travelers were expressing reluctance to fly with United, while several major corporations were reviewing their corporate travel policies to avoid airlines with poor disability rights records. The airline stock price had already declined by 2% in after-hours trading, as investors recognized the potential financial impact of the discrimination scandal and the likelihood of costly legal settlements and regulatory penalties. In response to the growing crisis, CEO Thompson made the decision to issue a public apology and announce immediate policy changes, rather than waiting for legal proceedings or regulatory investigations to force action. I want to personally apologize to Dr. Sarah Kim for the discriminatory treatment she received from our employee, Thompson's statement read. This incident does not represent United Airlines' values or policies, and we are taking immediate action to ensure it never happens again. The statement outlines several specific measures, including mandatory retraining for all customer service employees, enhanced oversight of disability accommodation procedures, and the establishment of a dedicated customer advocacy position for passengers with special needs. However, disability rights advocates and legal experts noted that corporate apologies and policy announcements were only meaningful if they were accompanied by concrete implementation and ongoing accountability measures. Sarah's conference presentation the following day became one of the most attended sessions in the event's history, as word spread about her discrimination experience and its connection to her groundbreaking research on spinal cord injury treatment. My research focuses on helping people with spinal cord injuries regain independence and mobility, Sarah told the packed auditorium. But yesterday's experience reminded me that scientific advances are only part of the solution. We also need to change social attitudes and institutional practices that continue to treat people with disabilities as lesser citizens. The presentation received a standing ovation from the hundreds of researchers, physicians, and advocates in attendance, many of whom approached Sarah afterward to express support and discuss collaborative approaches to both medical treatment and civil rights advocacy. Dr. Martinez, the conference director, announced that the organization would be establishing a new initiative focused on accessibility and discrimination issues affecting disabled medical professionals, with Sarah serving as the founding chair of the committee. The conference coverage, combined with the ongoing media attention about the airline discrimination, created a powerful narrative about the intersection of professional achievement and civil rights challenges that resonated with audiences far beyond the medical and disability rights communities. Major television networks began featuring Sarah's story in their national news broadcasts, with several programs dedicating extended segments to the broader issues of airline discrimination and disability rights enforcement. The Today Show interview, conducted via satellite from Seattle, reached millions of viewers and generated thousands of additional social media responses from people sharing their own experiences with discrimination and expressing support for stronger civil rights enforcement. What's particularly troubling about Dr. Kim's experience is that this happened to someone with extensive documentation, professional credentials, and the resources to fight back. It makes you wonder how many other disabled travelers face similar treatment but don't have the visibility or means to seek justice. The interview resonated with disability rights organizations across the country, who began coordinating their advocacy efforts around Sarah's case as an example of ongoing discrimination and the need for stronger legal protections. By the end of Sarah's first day in Seattle, her experience at Gate 12 had evolved from a single incident of discrimination into a national conversation about disability rights, corporate accountability, and the ongoing struggle for equal treatment in American society. The Department of Transportation announced that it would be conducting a formal investigation of United Airlines' disability accommodation practices, while several members of Congress called for hearings on airline discrimination and stronger enforcement of existing civil rights laws. Sarah found herself at the center of a movement that was much larger than her individual experience, with the opportunity to use her professional credibility and personal story to advance civil rights protections for millions of disabled Americans. As she prepared for additional media interviews and meetings with advocacy organizations, Sarah reflected on how a single act of discrimination had created an opportunity to address systemic issues that affected countless other people with disabilities. The discrimination she had faced at Gate 12 was transforming into a catalyst for change that could improve the travel experiences and civil rights protections for disabled individuals across the country. Her story had become a powerful reminder that the fight for equality and dignity was far from over, but also that individual courage and collective action could create meaningful progress toward a more inclusive and just society. The viral spread of her experience demonstrated that public awareness and outrage could be powerful tools for forcing institutional change, even when traditional complaint procedures and regulatory oversight had proven inadequate to prevent discrimination. As Sarah looked ahead to the continuing legal, legislative, and advocacy work that would result from her experience, she felt both the weight of responsibility and the hope that comes from knowing that difficult experiences can be transformed into opportunities for positive change that benefits entire communities of people who deserve better treatment and greater respect.
During her disciplinary meeting with human resources representatives and senior management, Janet continued to defend her actions and demonstrated a troubling lack of understanding about disability rights requirements and her own professional responsibilities. "I still believe I was following proper safety procedures," Janet insisted during the disciplinary hearing. "That wheelchair looked heavy and complicated, and I thought it might cause delays or problems with the flight." The Human Resources Director, Patricia Chang, was appalled by Janet's continued insensitivity and failure to acknowledge the discriminatory nature of her behavior. "Janet, Dr. Kim provided complete documentation showing that her wheelchair met all airline requirements. You made assumptions based on her disability rather than reviewing the actual facts. That's the textbook definition of discrimination." United Airlines CEO David Thompson had been personally briefed on the incident and its rapidly escalating media coverage. As someone who had previously championed the airline's diversity and inclusion initiatives, he was particularly concerned about the reputational damage and the potential for federal regulatory action. "This incident represents a complete failure of our training programs and corporate values," Thompson told his executive team during an emergency meeting. "We need to take immediate, comprehensive action to address not just this specific case, but the systemic issues that allowed it to happen." The airline's legal department had already begun preparing for potential lawsuits and federal investigations, while the operations team was reviewing disability accommodation procedures across all airport locations to identify and correct similar problems before they could result in additional incidents. In Seattle, Sarah's story continued to gain momentum as more news outlets picked up the coverage and disability rights organizations began using her experience as a catalyst for broader advocacy campaigns. The timing was particularly significant because Congress was currently considering updates to the Air Carrier Access Act that would strengthen enforcement mechanisms and increase penalties for discrimination. Senator Patricia Johnson, who served on the Transportation Committee and had been a longtime advocate for disability rights, issued a statement calling for immediate congressional hearings on airline discrimination and stronger federal oversight of compliance with accessibility requirements.
Dr. Kim's experience demonstrates that despite decades of civil rights legislation, people with disabilities are still being treated as second-class citizens by some airlines and their employees. Senator Johnson's statement read, "We need stronger enforcement mechanisms and real accountability to ensure that these discriminatory practices stop immediately." The statement from a prominent senator elevated Sarah's story from a customer service complaint to a matter of federal legislative interest, increasing pressure on United Airlines to implement meaningful reforms rather than simply offering individual compensation. As Sarah prepared for her conference presentation in her Seattle hotel, she was contacted by producers from several national television programs who wanted to interview her about the discrimination and its broader implications. While she was initially reluctant to become the face of a media campaign, she recognized that her professional credibility and articulate advocacy could help advance important civil rights issues. Dr. Patricia Williams, the civil rights attorney who had witnessed the discrimination at Gate 12, had flown to Seattle specifically to meet with Sarah and discuss potential legal strategies. During their dinner meeting, Williams outlined the various federal laws that had been violated and the range of remedies available through both civil litigation and regulatory complaints. "Sarah, what happened to you wasn't just morally wrong, it was illegal under multiple federal statutes. The Air Carrier Access Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and various civil rights laws all provide grounds for legal action. But more importantly, this case could establish precedents that protect other disabled travelers in the future." Sarah was interested in the legal possibilities but wanted to ensure that any action she took would focus on creating systemic change rather than just individual compensation. "Patricia, I'm not primarily interested in monetary damages for myself. What I want to see is comprehensive policy reform, better training for airline employees, and real accountability for discrimination."
By the time Dr. Sarah Kim's flight landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, her story of discrimination at Chicago O'Hare had already begun to spread across social media platforms and news outlets with unprecedented velocity. What had started as a single incident of disability discrimination was rapidly evolving into a national conversation about civil rights, corporate accountability, and the ongoing challenges faced by disabled individuals in their daily lives. The initial social media post from passengers who had witnessed the discrimination at Gate 12 had generated thousands of shares, comments, and reactions within just a few hours of the flight duration. The hashtag Gate12Discrimination was trending on Twitter, with disability rights advocates, medical professionals, and ordinary citizens sharing their own experiences of similar treatment and expressing outrage about the systematic barriers still faced by people with disabilities. Robert Chen's preliminary article for the Chicago Tribune, filed from the airplane's Wi-Fi during the flight, had been published online and was already being shared by major news aggregation sites. His detailed account of the incident, including quotes from passenger witnesses and legal analysis from Dr. Patricia Williams, provided a comprehensive documentation of the discrimination that would serve as the foundation for ongoing media coverage. What I witnessed at Gate 12 today was not just poor customer service or a simple misunderstanding. It was clear, deliberate discrimination against an accomplished physician whose only offense was using a wheelchair for mobility. Dr. Sarah Kim's treatment by United Airlines gate agent Janet Morrison represents exactly the kind of institutional bias that federal disability rights laws were designed to prevent. The article had already generated hundreds of comments from readers sharing their own experiences with airline discrimination, creating a growing repository of evidence that suggested Sarah's experience was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of discriminatory treatment that demanded systematic reform. As Sarah disembarked from her flight at SeaTac Airport, she was surprised to be met by representatives from the International Spinal Cord Research Conference, local disability rights organizations, and several news outlets who had learned of her scheduled arrival and wanted to provide support or gather additional information about the incident. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the conference director, who had known Sarah professionally for over a decade, was among the first to greet her as she made her way through the arrival gate. "Sarah, I cannot believe what you went through today. The entire medical community is outraged by this treatment, and we want you to know that you have our complete support in whatever action you choose to take." Sarah was both touched by the support and somewhat overwhelmed by the unexpected media attention. "Jennifer, I appreciate everyone's concern, but right now I just want to focus on my presentation tomorrow and the important research we're here to discuss. Though I do hope this incident can help raise awareness about the discrimination that disabled people still face every day." Among those waiting at the airport was Maria Rodriguez, Executive Director of the Pacific Northwest Disability Rights Coalition, who had been monitoring the social media coverage of Sarah's experience and recognized its potential significance for advancing disability rights advocacy. "Dr. Kim, I've been following the coverage of what happened to you today, and I want you to know that your experience is unfortunately very typical of what disabled travelers face. But what's different this time is the documentation, the witnesses, and the public attention. This could be a pivotal moment for forcing real changes in airline policies and training." Sarah appreciated Rodriguez's perspective and recognized that her visibility as a prominent physician and researcher gave her a platform that many discrimination victims didn't have. "Maria, I've been thinking about that during the flight. I have a responsibility to use this experience to help create change for other disabled people who might not have the same resources or visibility to fight back." Meanwhile, back in Chicago, the aftermath of the Gate 12 incident was creating increasingly serious consequences for United Airlines and the employees involved. Michael Rodriguez, the duty manager who had intervened to resolve the immediate situation, had filed comprehensive reports with both airport security and United Airlines corporate headquarters, documenting the discrimination and its potential legal implications. The airline's corporate communications department was already working with legal counsel to develop a response strategy that would address the growing media attention while minimizing liability exposure. However, the presence of multiple witnesses, extensive documentation, and the involvement of a civil rights attorney made it clear that this would not be a simple matter that could be resolved through standard public relations techniques. Janet Morrison, the gate agent whose discriminatory actions had initiated the crisis, was facing formal disciplinary proceedings that could result in termination of her employment. Her personnel file, which had been thoroughly reviewed following the incident, revealed a pattern of complaints about insensitive treatment of passengers with special needs, suggesting that proper training and supervision could have prevented the discrimination against Sarah. Dr. Williams used the flight time to draft a detailed legal analysis of the incident, documenting the specific federal laws that had been violated and the potential remedies available under the Air Carrier Access Act. Her preliminary assessment suggested that United Airlines faced significant liability for the discriminatory treatment and would need to implement substantial policy changes to prevent future violations. Robert Chen worked on his article throughout the flight, interviewing passengers who had witnessed the discrimination and gathering background information about disability rights in aviation. His story would be published within hours of landing in Seattle and would quickly be picked up by national news outlets. Meanwhile, back at Chicago O'Hare, Michael Rodriguez was dealing with the immediate aftermath of the incident. He had filed detailed reports with both airport security and United Airlines corporate headquarters, documenting the discrimination and the potential legal and public relations consequences. Janet Morrison was called into Rodriguez's office for a formal disciplinary meeting, where she would face serious questions about her training, her understanding of disability accommodation requirements, and her fitness to continue in a customer-facing role. "Janet, what happened today was not just a customer service failure," Rodriguez explained during their meeting. "It was illegal discrimination that could result in federal investigation, significant financial penalties, and lasting damage to our airline's reputation." Janet continued to defend her actions, demonstrating a complete failure to understand the seriousness of the situation or her own culpability in creating it. I was just doing my job and following what I thought were the right procedures. The right procedures require accommodating passengers with disabilities who have proper documentation, Rodriguez replied firmly. Dr. Kim met every requirement, and you denied her service solely on assumptions about her wheelchair. That's the definition of discrimination. Rodriguez's preliminary investigation had already revealed that this was not Janet's first problematic interaction with disabled passengers. Her personnel file contained previous complaints about insensitive treatment and failure to follow accommodation procedures, suggesting a pattern of discriminatory behavior that should have been addressed through additional training or disciplinary action. By the time Sarah's flight landed in Seattle, the story of her discrimination had already begun to spread beyond social media into mainstream news coverage. Local news stations in both Chicago and Seattle had picked up the story, and disability rights organizations were beginning to issue statements calling for accountability and policy reforms. The International Spinal Cord Research Conference, where Sarah was scheduled to present her research, also became aware of the discrimination she had faced while traveling to the event. Conference organizers reached out to express their support and to offer any assistance she might need in pursuing formal complaints or legal action. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the conference director and a longtime colleague of Sarah's, was particularly outraged by the discrimination. Sarah is one of the most respected researchers in our field, and the idea that she was treated this way simply because she uses a wheelchair is absolutely appalling. This incident reflects broader societal attitudes that we must work to change. As Sarah prepared for her presentation the following day, she realized that the discrimination she had experienced could actually enhance the impact of her research presentation by providing a personal context for the importance of her work in helping spinal cord injury patients achieve greater independence and dignity. Her research on neural regeneration therapy was already groundbreaking from a scientific perspective. But her recent experience with discrimination added urgency to the broader mission of ensuring that people with disabilities were treated with the respect and equality they deserved in all aspects of society. The viral spread of Sarah's story on social media had also attracted the attention of major disability rights advocacy organizations, who recognized that her experience represented a perfect case study for educating the public about ongoing discrimination and the need for stronger enforcement of existing civil rights laws. United Airlines corporate headquarters was monitoring the growing media attention and social media coverage with increasing alarm. The company's public relations team was already preparing damage control strategies, while the legal department was assessing the potential liability and developing recommendations for policy reforms and settlement discussions. CEO David Thompson was personally briefed on the incident and its implications, recognizing that the airline faced not only legal action but also significant reputational damage that could affect customer loyalty and business operations. The discriminatory treatment of a prominent physician and researcher was exactly the kind of story that could generate sustained negative coverage and regulatory scrutiny. As the evening progressed, Sarah's story continued to gain momentum across multiple platforms and audiences. Medical professionals were sharing it as an example of how discrimination affected their colleagues. Disability rights advocates were using it to illustrate ongoing civil rights violations. Air travelers were expressing concern about airline policies and training standards. The incident had evolved from a single act of discrimination into a broader conversation about disability rights, corporate accountability, and the need for systemic changes in how airlines and other service industries accommodate customers with disabilities. Sarah, preparing for her conference presentation in her Seattle hotel room, was both exhausted by the day's events and energized by the potential for creating positive change through increased public awareness and advocacy.
Her experience had been painful and frustrating, but it had also provided a platform for educating others and pushing for the kinds of policy reforms that could prevent similar discrimination from occurring in the future. The discrimination she had faced at Gate 12 was about to become one of the most widely discussed disability rights incidents in recent years, with implications that would extend beyond the single airline or airport into broader questions of civil rights, corporate responsibility, and social justice in American society.
Meanwhile, Rodriguez was working on his tablet to not only confirm Sarah's accommodation, but to upgrade her to business class as a gesture of goodwill and compensation for the discriminatory treatment she had experienced. Dr. Kim, I'm upgrading you to business class for this flight, and I'm also providing you with vouchers for future travel as an apology for this unacceptable experience. Sarah appreciated the gesture, but made it clear that her primary concern was preventing similar incidents from occurring to other disabled passengers. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm grateful for the upgrade, but what I really want to see is comprehensive retraining for your staff and clear accountability for discrimination. This shouldn't happen to anyone. I completely agree, Rodriguez replied. I'm going to personally ensure that this incident is reported to our corporate headquarters and that comprehensive policy reviews and training improvements are implemented as a result of your experience. Janet Morrison, who had been standing aside during these exchanges, was growing increasingly defensive about her handling of the situation. Rather than acknowledging her mistakes and learning from the feedback she was receiving, she continued to justify her discriminatory actions. I was just trying to follow safety protocols, Janet muttered to Kevin Torres. These people don't understand the complexities of airline operations. Kevin was shocked by Janet's continued insensitivity and complete failure to recognize the discriminatory nature of her behavior. Janet, Dr. Kim had all the proper documentation, and there was nothing unsafe about accommodating her wheelchair. We had empty seats, and her equipment met all the requirements. But Janet remained entrenched in her position, unable or unwilling to acknowledge that her assumptions about disabled passengers were both factually incorrect and legally problematic. This attitude would soon prove to be a significant liability for both her own employment and the airline's reputation. As Flight 847 began its boarding process, Rodriguez personally escorted Sarah to the business class cabin and ensured that her wheelchair was properly handled by the ground crew. The other passengers, many of whom had witnessed the discrimination at the gate, provided enthusiastic support and encouragement as Sarah boarded the aircraft. "Thank you for standing up for what's right," said the elderly woman with the walker. "What happened to you was wrong, and I'm glad to see the manager trying to make it right." The businessman who had first spoken up in Sarah's defense approached her during boarding. "I'm a corporate executive myself, and I can tell you that what that gate agent did was inexcusable. I'll be writing to United Airlines about this incident." Dr. Williams, who was coincidentally traveling on the same flight, made arrangements to sit near Sarah so they could discuss potential legal strategies during the journey to Seattle. "Dr. Kim, I specialize in exactly this type of discrimination case, and I'd be honored to help you pursue this matter if you're interested." Robert Chen, the Chicago Tribune journalist, also confirmed that he would be writing a detailed article about the incident and its implications for disability rights in air travel. "This story needs to be told," he explained to Sarah. "The public needs to understand that this kind of discrimination is still happening and that it's completely unacceptable." As the aircraft prepared for departure, Sarah reflected on the day's events and their broader significance. While she was disappointed and frustrated by the discrimination she had experienced, she was also encouraged by the support she had received from other passengers, the professional response from the duty manager, and the potential for creating positive change through public awareness and legal action.
The flight to Seattle proceeded without incident, with the cabin crew providing exemplary service to all passengers, including ensuring that Sarah's needs were properly accommodated throughout the journey. However, the real impact of the day's events was just beginning to unfold. During the flight, several passengers were sharing their videos and photos of the gate incident on social media platforms, with posts quickly gaining traction and generating significant public attention. The hashtags disability rights and airline discrimination began trending as people shared their own experiences with similar treatment and expressed outrage about the discrimination Sarah had faced.
I'll be happy to provide a statement once we've properly resolved Dr. Kim's accommodation needs, Rodriguez replied diplomatically. Right now, my priority is ensuring that she receives the service she deserves. Meanwhile, other passengers in the gate area were becoming increasingly vocal in their support for Sarah and their criticism of Janet's discriminatory treatment. Social media posts were already beginning to appear, with several passengers sharing photos and videos of the confrontation, along with commentary about disability discrimination in air travel. Kevin Torres, the junior gate agent who had expressed concerns about Janet's handling of the situation, approached Rodriguez privately. "Michael, I tried to suggest that we review the policies, but Janet insisted she was following proper procedures. I knew something wasn't right, but I wasn't sure how to intervene." Rodriguez appreciated Kevin's honesty and recognized that the younger employee had attempted to prevent the discrimination but had been overruled by his supervisor. "Kevin, you were absolutely right to question this decision. In the future, if you see something that doesn't seem consistent with our training, please don't hesitate to contact me directly." Sarah had been listening to these various conversations while maintaining her composure, but she was also carefully documenting everything for the formal complaints she planned to file with both the airline and federal oversight agencies. Her experience as a physician had taught her the importance of thorough documentation, especially when dealing with institutional failures that required systemic corrections. "Mr. Rodriguez," Sarah said, "I appreciate your efforts to resolve this situation, but I want to make sure you understand the broader implications of what happened here. This isn't just about one gate agent making a mistake. This represents a failure in training, supervision, and corporate culture that suggests disabled passengers are still being treated as second-class citizens." Rodriguez nodded solemnly, recognizing the validity of Sarah's concerns and the potential scope of the institutional problems her experience had revealed. "Dr. Kim, you're absolutely right, and I want to assure you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated and addressed at the highest levels of our organization." As they continued this conversation, airport security personnel arrived at Gate 12 in response to Janet's earlier call about a disruptive passenger. However, when the security officers observed the calm and professional discussion taking place between Rodriguez and Sarah, with multiple witnesses supporting her position, they quickly realized that no security intervention was necessary. "We received a call about a disturbance at this gate. Is there a situation that requires our assistance?" the lead security officer said to Rodriguez. Rodriguez looked embarrassed as he realized that Janet's call to security had been based on her discriminatory characterization of Sarah as a problematic passenger rather than any actual security concern. "No, officer, there's no security issue here. We're resolving a customer service matter and everything is under control." The security officer nodded and prepared to leave, but not before several passengers approached him to explain what they had witnessed. "Officer, that gate agent discriminated against the lady in the wheelchair," said the businessman who had spoken up earlier. "She was completely professional, but they tried to deny her boarding because of her disability." The security officer took note of these witness statements, understanding that airport security reports could become relevant if formal complaints were filed with federal agencies or if legal action was pursued. Dr. Williams, the civil rights attorney, used this opportunity to provide her contact information to several of the passenger witnesses, explaining that their testimonies could be valuable if the incident resulted in legal proceedings. "What you witnessed today was illegal discrimination.
Your willingness to speak up and document what happened could help ensure that other disabled travelers don't face similar treatment.
Duty manager Michael Rodriguez immediately recognized the gravity of the situation unfolding at Gate 12. With 15 years of experience in airline operations and extensive training in federal disability accommodation requirements, he understood that what he was witnessing represented a clear violation of the Air Carrier Access Act and a potential public relations disaster for United Airlines. "Janet, I need you to step aside for a moment," Rodriguez said firmly, his tone conveying both authority and urgency. "Dr. Kim, I sincerely apologize for this situation. Let me review your documentation and resolve this immediately." Sarah handed Rodriguez the same folder that Janet had dismissed without proper examination. As he opened it, his expression grew increasingly serious as he reviewed the comprehensive documentation Sarah had prepared for her travel. The folder contained detailed specifications for Sarah's wheelchair, including weight, dimensions, and battery information that clearly met all current airline regulations. It included letters from her medical team confirming the necessity of the device for her mobility and independence. Most importantly, it contained copies of previous airline approvals and successful travel experiences with major carriers, including United Airlines itself. "Dr. Kim, all of your documentation is completely in order," Rodriguez said after his thorough review. "Your wheelchair meets every requirement and you have a confirmed reservation for this flight. I cannot understand why you were told otherwise." Janet Morrison watched this exchange with growing anxiety as she realized that her supervisor was contradicting her decision in front of other passengers and potentially documenting a serious policy violation. "Michael, I was just following safety protocols. The flight is very full, and I thought—" "The flight is not full, Janet," Rodriguez interrupted, pulling up the passenger manifest on his tablet. "We have 12 empty seats in economy and 3 available in business class. And even if we were at capacity, that would not justify denying accommodation to a passenger with a disability who has proper documentation." Dr. Patricia Williams, the civil rights attorney who had been observing the situation, approached the counter with her business card in hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Dr. Patricia Williams, and I specialize in disability rights law. I witnessed this entire interaction, and I want you to know that what just occurred represents a clear violation of federal law." Rodriguez accepted Dr. Williams' business card with visible concern, understanding that having a civil rights attorney witness the discrimination would significantly complicate any potential legal ramifications for the airline. "Dr. Williams, I want to assure you that this incident does not reflect United Airlines policies or training standards." Robert Chen, the Chicago Tribune journalist, also approached the counter with his press credentials visible. "I'm Robert Chen from the Chicago Tribune, and I've been documenting this situation. Mr. Rodriguez, would you care to make a statement about your airline's accommodation policies for passengers with disabilities?" The presence of both a civil rights attorney and a journalist made Rodriguez acutely aware that this incident could rapidly escalate beyond a simple customer service failure into a major news story with significant legal and financial consequences for the airline.